Hey guys, it's Jack. I just wanted to talk to you today about a way that you can help support the podcast if you're not already. To support the channel is to become a Patreon member. So we have Patreon memberships that start at just $5 a month. And when you sign up, you get access to all of our episodes ad free. That's the big bonus for that. I mean, we also do some Patreon bonus episodes for our subscribers. But this is the biggest and best way that you can support the Team House channel and podcast if you'd like to. And we really appreciate that. So go and check us out at patreon.com/the Team House.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Eyes On. I'm Andy Milburn.
I'm Jason Lyons.
I'm Dimitri Kontakos.
And we have, by the way, we're jumping right into this now because viewers said they didn't want to hear from us. So I wanted to know the introductions. We're going to jump right in to the grist of our show. Lots of stuff happening in the world. We suspect that perhaps the audience may be getting Gaza fatigue. I'm going to be attacked for saying that, right? Like our audience is getting Gaza fatigue. Maybe the Gazans getting Gazans fatigue. But anyway, we're a different topic, okay? Hey, wait, you guys remind me of just the details of the bill that is passing. Not a lot of detail, but just what's the catalyst right now for getting things moving again in Ukraine?
I mean, fantastic question. Hold on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think $6 billion bill.
60
right?
bill, yeah, 60 billion.
Yeah.
60 billion. And that is, that's going to pass. Of course, what has happened over the last 4 months, and we're not getting into bipartisan discussion, but munitions there's been a delay, hold up, a cessation in delivering munitions across the board to Ukraine. That's US munitions. And it has had a pretty serious effect, at the pointed end, and has allowed the Russians to gather momentum, arguably, for the offensive that they seem about to launch now. I think that's probably the fairest way to put this, and it's irrefutable. So what we have right now is in I don't know. Actually, that's not. I sent you a graphic you can post if you so wish in the chat. I think it's kind of useful to look at a map, but you've got the Russians massing 50,000 guys, all right? Not a huge amount, but that's enough for, operational reserve, a breakout force, certainly, which is what has been missing to this point, what both sides have missed. And they're massing those troops opposite Ukrainian lines in Kharkiv, which is in the northeastern part of the country. It's really the northern boundary of Donbass, and it's essentially been under siege. Okay, it looks like they are going to make a determined effort to take Kharkiv. In order to do so, they've got to capture 5 towns to the north and east of Kharkiv, all of which, sadly, I'm very familiar with. The Ukrainians now, there's a lot at stake here because Ukrainians actually had their early warning picket system, one of the endpoints of the early warning picket system for air defense up there outside a town called Konstanivka, where I spent a good deal of time. It's about a 250-man unit. But you see what I'm saying? If you imagine just, I use the term picket line of early warning systems, as the Russians now also are making a determined effort to destroy Ukrainian infrastructure and are being remarkably more successful than they have been previously. Massive use of glide bombs in particular. So anyway, the Russians are massing to take these 5 towns. If they do, it's serious. Not only do they now knock out part of Ukraine's early warning system, but more importantly, they threaten a major city, Kharkiv, and can isolate Kharkiv from Kiev. So it's a big deal. Hey guys, I'll pause there for a moment. I will get into some of the other strange shit happening there on the Russian side. But any comments, questions? I know I've just kind of gone on a little bit.
No, it's great. I mean, I'm looking into like what's in the like what do you get for 60 almost 61 billion? It's obviously more ATACMs. I'm assuming it's more artillery shells, HIMARS, launch
Yeah.
vehicles.
Well, the biggest concern, short term, are artillery shells. Okay, so there's a quote from a guy. Actually, I don't know him, but I have met his I've met his XO. He's with the 96th Division, which is a very good division, but it's been involved in some of the thickest fighting. And the commander's a guy named Colonel Fedosenko, who's a extraordinary warrior, been wounded many times. And he's optimistic about the long term. He thinks they can fight off the Russians, but he's quoted as saying that it's very interesting. The Russians are now attacking. They were attacking, get this, every 2 to 3 hours over the last few days using armored vehicles and tanks. Can you imagine? Can you
Wow.
imagine being in your trench facing just day and night, 2 or 3 hours, these mass attacks? And according to Timoshenko, I'm sorry, Fedosenko, they've run out of ammunition several times. In his words, they've been fighting with spades when the Russians make it to their trenches. I don't, who knows if that's true or not. But his guys, I can envision them doing that. There's some tough mofos, and these guys have been fighting since near the beginning.
Mm.
He's not whining. He's just saying, hey, my brigade, or rather, yeah, the regiment has been down to in support 5 shells a day for their Paladin howitzers. And he says, what can I do with this number of shells?
Yeah.
But they great jubilation in the front lines about news of this stuff coming through, but it's going to take weeks, maybe months to reach the front lines. In the meantime, hey, here's an interesting point for you. So reports from there's two units defending Kharkiv on the Ukrainian side, the 92nd Division, and then a brigade called the Kraken Brigade. It's actually really a battalion-sized unit. And they have a reputation for being very tough fighters. The Russians accused them of atrocities and war crimes. But they have been, but there's no doubt about it. They're a solid infantry unit, and they've been placed there in Kharkiv in preparation for the attack. On the Russian side, and here's where there's some hope, Ukrainian intelligence reports say that some 70% of Russian soldiers in these assaults are former convicts. 70%.
Wow.
But they're also seeing mercenaries, Tajik, Uzbek, Turkmen, those, but also Cubans and even Somalis, right?
Crazy.
Piracy is not a good business now, so you
Yeah.
might as well pick up an AK and go to the frozen north. It's summertime, so
Yeah.
they can make it back to Somalia when it gets really frigid up there in Donbass. Um, and also intelligence reports say that for the guys who are not convicts and mercenaries, they're mostly former cooks, mechanics, guys who came into the military to do things other than carry a weapon and fire it. So suggests the Russians are, of course, still having manpower problems, but nevertheless, they've got this operational reserve. So their plan is to launch just these continuous heavy casualty assaults using their convict cannon fodder, and then use this exploitation force when they've worn the Ukrainians down. The question is, how can the Ukrainians hold out long enough before all these munitions arrive? My bet would be to say yes, but that's not the issue at this point. The issue is 1 year ago, we were talking about, as the Ukrainian offensive kicked off, we were talking about worst case scenario that they would have to defend, hold their own line, right? That was the worst case. Well, now that's the best case as the Russians begin their assault. And, it's a tough time in Ukraine. Those who are still there will tell you that, all the cities are being hit. I mean, as hard or harder than previous times, but with weapons that are making it through the air defense systems. And such as, a combination of glide bombs, drones, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, as we talked about. That's a really tough air defense proposition. Now, in
All
the
right, so I have
meantime,
a bit of a
yeah,
breakdown of like the
yeah, yeah.
60.7 billion.
Mhm.
23 billion would be used by the US to replenish its military stockpiles, opening the door to future US transfers to Ukraine. So
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's artillery shells, a lot of it, or there's probably ATACMS too. Another 14 billion would go to Ukraine, the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, in which the Pentagon buys advanced new weapon systems for the Ukraine military directly from US defense contractors.
Mhm.
There's also more than 11 billion to fund the current US military operations in the region, enhancing the capabilities of the Ukrainian military and fostering intelligence cooperation, and about 8 billion in non-military assistance.
Okay, so when you pare all that down, roughly 14 million, so roughly what, 1/5 of the total
Billion, yeah.
is actually going to the guys in the front line. A lot of that other stuff, the strange thing is that the opposition to this Ukrainian bill hasn't really looked or doesn't care what it's all about. We noticed there, I'm gonna have to go on a mute in a moment because Richie's going ape shit. But we noticed there that a chunk of that money went to US troops in order to train the Ukrainians, infrastructure,
Yeah.
and facilities, all of that stuff. So it's not even, it's directly benefiting our own guys, and yet still was opposed. I mean, this is just effing absurd. Now, so getting back to the 92nd commander. Hold it. There's something he said that I've just got to read, because he said we can either fight for Ukraine against Russia now, or we will be overrun and forced to fight for Russia against Europe. So he's like very pragmatic. But his point is, look, this sense of urgency and existential threat, it needs to permeate whole of Ukrainian society, and a lot of people, some 500,000 young men have left the country to avoid military service. So this is kind of a message: hey, you better come back to defend your country, or there may not be a country to defend.
Yeah, I was sitting here thinking about,
yeah, go ahead.
When you were talking about the breakdown, that 17% and what they're made up of. I wonder what their Russia's home front troops look like, the ones they didn't send, which speaks to the question of, a lot of people are talking about, what's after Ukraine, would they move against the rest of Europe, that sort of thing. Would they even have the capability the manpower to? I'd be curious to see what their home front troops look like.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jason. I would, does Russia have sufficient manpower to confront NATO in a, slogfest? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But to your point, it's a great point. Yeah, the Russians have not put all of their best troops in the right. Well, let me put it this way: some very of the considered elite, some of the elite units around that are based around Moscow, or in that region, have not deployed at all to Ukraine. But I think that's more from a personal protection concerns, but also because you start sending Muscovites to die in droves. Well, that's near home, right? Whereas if you send guys from the distant republics, former distant republics, it doesn't really filter to the power center, right? But there's something else. So, but Russia believes it's at war now with NATO, but it's not going. It's not unlikely to confront it tank for tank, artillery for artillery. I think a really concerning area is not the use of proxies, but not like we've seen, but the use of proxies such as saboteurs, fifth columnists throughout Europe. And if that sounds paranoid, there had been a spate of sabotage attacks across Europe attributed to the Russians in the last 2 or 3 months. There was a factory was was burned in Berlin, or I mean, a fire broke out. It was put out, I believe, before it was it caused serious damage.
The
But
Deal Metal Factory, right?
yeah, yeah, it's that's exactly right. So it manufactures projectiles for the Iris anti-defense system, which is a very effective system that the Germans supply. So that looks suspicious. And in April, there were a couple of Russian saboteurs were detained in Germany. They were German-Russian dual nationals in April. Okay, and this didn't make the news here. I thought it would make big news. On suspicion of plotting attacks on U.S. military facilities in Germany on behalf of the GRU. Now, the Germans have released that information, so they obviously these guys, they've connected them to the GRU. So they're not just kind of lone wolf. Hey, we like Russia. They've been directed and provided supplies and everything to do this. These are acts of war, right? Maybe it doesn't make the news because NATO doesn't want to acknowledge publicly that Russia is attacking it, right? Yeah. That makes it a little difficult. And then in Poland, there was the Polish police arrested a guy who was passing the GRU information on I'm going to mispronounce it.
Yeah, that's a tough name.
Rzeszów Airport, right? Which is the I believe still the headquarters of whatever they're calling that unit there in Poland, the Eastern Flank, some dramatic name NATO uses.
But you wrote it here. It's the most important hub for military aid to Ukraine. So it's a big logistics choke point. I'm assuming if they hit it and took it out.
Yeah, it very much so. But when you talk about potential civilian casualties, attack on a factory at night's one thing, but attack on a major airport is another. So those guys were accused of belonging to the Wagner Group, which suggests, of course, the Wagner Group may be in play here. I mean, why not? What do you do with these guys now when you don't want to mass them together, right? Because they do bad things, like advance on Moscow. So you launch them in little groups to do these things where they achieve strategic effect, but you have plausible deniability. The Wagner Group? Fuck no, we don't have anything to do with those guys. They just tried to kill the boss. Are you crazy? So it's very clever. I mean, this is nothing new. In 2014, when the Russians did the Crimea gig and the initial invasion to Donbass, they blew up a factory in Belgium, an arms factory that was supplying the Ukrainians. So European, not NATO, but European intelligence organizations are saying that this looks like an new active measure campaign. Now, they're using that in a rather active measures often, it doesn't matter. But yes, a campaign of sabotage combined with cyber attacks that have also stepped up. And when you think about it, the spooks that we bring on this show, like Jason, like Mark, like Mick, will tell you that an operation like this, a covert operation, you don't throw together in a few days. It takes months, right? I mean, Jason, what would you say to infiltrate and plan all this?
Yeah, it's definitely not something you just say, hey, you guys off the streets, this is what you're going to do. These are people you have in place already, especially those, the German Russian nationals. Their faces are seen in the streets. They're, they know the local shop owners, they're good guys, good girls, whatever it is. And they've made the inroads to be able to get close to these places without arousing suspicion.
Yeah, it's a very difficult topic, right? From the Germans, they're dealing, essentially with traitors. But what do they do? Do they now? Hopefully, they're paying close attention to anyone with Russian, German.
Yeah.
But so there's all this stuff. So when we talk about Russia kind of taking advantage of this lull, taking advantage of it's extraordinary. It's focused the economy now on industrial production to kind of edge ahead by launching these attacks that are that are potentially very harmful. I mean, these are terrorist attacks, major ones that are not making the news, perhaps because they're not, I don't know, they're not Islamic based, or but I think perhaps it's because NATO doesn't want to admit this is happening.
Makes sense.
I mean, they don't want to
Yeah.
inflame, right? Inflame even tensions even more.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's and so these lunatics who try and argue that Ukraine is not a U.S. problem. Um, I was just, I wonder whether they watch the news at all. What do they think is going to happen after Ukraine becomes a Russian vassal or a frozen conflict? Do you think the Russian Putin's going to go, "Hey, cool, that's awesome"? No, he's been validated. It's just the beginning. Um, so, and this guy's saying, "Hey, yeah, we'll fight the Russians until they make us fight you." Okay, well, it wasn't that long ago when that was actually happening,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they were on the wrong side. So we've
Yeah.
lost, we're losing this very this critical conflict. And when all the cards were on our side, not a single NATO soldier scratched, right? And and Russia, Russia's military machine destroyed, essentially. And let alone Russia, I want to say a pariah, but actually Russia is not. Russia is less of a pariah than Israel right now. If you look in the UN Security Council, a block of votes, people, countries that do not vote against Russia, it's a huge number. In most of the Middle East, most of Africa, most of Asia, it's only within Europe that Russia is a pariah. That's something we forget, that this isolation. And Iran, too, is in the same boat. The sanctions are becoming increasingly less effective as Iran opens up, import lines. Well, it expands its import lines of everything that it, or most things that it needs, weapons components, in return for oil to Russia. It's a match made in hell. It's working for them.
I mean, it's not all like sunshine and rainbows for Russia. They just fired Shoigu,
Yeah.
or they
I mean,
reassigned them, quote unquote.
well, to be clear, yeah, Russia's in shit state. I'm talking about the Russian, Putin and his cronies who
Yeah.
are. But yeah, it's so very interesting. Though I'm not a criminologist, but I think a key part of this is this isn't going to have any positive effect for us, the West. Okay, Shogu was a bit of a namby-pamby, he's kind of the kid who always wants to, not the kid, but the person who always wants to be involved in something, but doesn't really add value to it, right? Yes, I know most officers fit that category. But the point is, he's supposed to be defense minister. Putin was getting pissed off with him because he kept interfering with the operations itself. Because everyone thought they could do something better, which is, it's hard to imagine doing things worse. But so this new guy, and I somewhere, do you have his name? It
He's
doesn't.
Andrei Belousev.
Yeah.
Belousev. Yeah.
So the key thing is he's an economist,
Yeah.
right? I mean, remember what I said about the economy now is driving the war effort, and the Russians are being, quite efficient with that. So I think that's yet another sign where emphasis is going to go. The Russians are going to continue to churn out artillery shells that allows them to fire. Estimates are vary daily, but many times what the Ukrainians can fire. And look, even when the Ukrainians were getting everything they needed, they were firing 6,000 shells a day to the Russians 50,000.
Wow.
So there's always been an imbalance. I can tell you that from personal experience. They were just fucking launching. I mean, unbelievable. It just seemed at the time, even 2 years ago, that they would run out, but of course they haven't. Hey, so the other thing, hey, before we move off Russia, then anything else, guys? Russia, Ukraine, we haven't talked about it for a while, but I think we brought everyone up to date.
I mean, I feel like there's a bit of a, Jay mentioned it too, like there's a bit of like a narrative going around that like Russia's gearing up for a war with NATO, a direct conflict, or at least going into like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, something like that. I mean, can they really, like Jay said, I mean, we talked about it. Like, I can't see them really pulling that off. I mean, maybe cutting through those three countries because they're tiny, but like they can't. I mean, I can't see it full-fledged kinetic war.
Yeah, I can't see a full-fledged kinetic war, but I think nor can I see Putin stepping down from what he's trying to do there in the Baltics, which is first of all, to just really secure that land corridor to Kaliningrad and put Baltic and Polish troops there under pressure. And step one in doing that, by the way, is taking Kharkiv. I mean, this is all potentially connected. So what I'm saying is I don't think we're not going to see an Article 5 trigger. That's the problem. We're going to see the anaconda steadily close on that Kaliningrad corridor and on the Baltics, cyber attacks, sabotage, just ratcheting up the pressure.
You see that GPS jamming and spoofing that's like based out of like just outside of St. Petersburg.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Russians, as I've said before on this show, they're world leaders when it comes to electronic warfare. I'm not talking about signals intelligence specifically, although they're very good at that, but they're not world leaders, but they are when it comes to things like jamming and spoofing. Just as far as skill and mass, they use it as a full-on weapon system in a way, in combined arms, in a way that we in the US do not do, because we just don't have the competence. Although, I mean, I know it seems strange to say that, but we don't integrate it at that level. But what we do is we sit here and we criticize the Russians for their shitty infantry because we think that infantry are the be all and end all. Well, of course they are, but my point is that we're missing the point here, that the Russians are more than mitigating for their the deficiencies in combat units and training and all that shit by having just world-class electronic warfare, which is really far more useful when it comes to operations in the gray zone. So the Baltic states, Poland in particular, need to watch out, and they know it. So
All right,
on that happy note,
the last bit, there were some reports, a couple members of the Iranian parliament, or whatever you want to call it there, talking about how Iran is already a nuclear power and has a weapon or is about to have a weapon. They're unconfirmed reports, obviously. I mean, I think on Fox News they had somebody talking about it. That's kind of crazy.
That's actually
Yeah.
that's actually really worrying, because something else happened in May. Remember, do you remember that drone strike that Iran launched in Israel back in April? Yeah. And we at the time it was it was like, the best thing I can describe is, it's kind of like that one incident was like Deus Ex Life, a lot of a lot of fanfare, a lot of show, but very little action, very little intent.
That is fair.
Yeah, but what, all is not well. So behind the scenes, as we said, the Iranians were sending a message. I mean, not the Iranians, the Israelis. And don't say same thing like you did last time, Dee, because we're almost taken off the air. The Israelis, they hit Natanz, right, in their counter strike, and it was intended to be a signal to the Iranians that, hey, we can penetrate your air defense systems anytime, and we know where your centrifuges are, and we can take them out. That was the message, okay? Well, the Iranians evidently said, well, thanks very much for the heads up. And in May, U.S. intelligence or I'm sorry, Western intelligence agencies are reporting that they have started to, or that they're building a nuclear facility in the Zagros Mountains. Now, the way I describe this isn't quite fair because the facility is pretty advanced. So they started it before the Israelis launched their counterattack. So it's not, but in any case, it was probably just a reminder to the Iranians that they needed to hurry the fuck up and build this thing. Right. So the Zagros Mountains, right? The point here is that the facilities are buried. So they've dug 4 entrances into the mountainside, and I think on open source you can see the satellite photos, but obviously not with this kind of detail. And each is about 6 meters wide by 8 meters high, and then deep down within the mountain, or there's kind of a shaft, and then beneath the mountain is a larger kind of hall where Western intelligence thinks that they have moved or are installing their centrifuges. So this facility is about 80 to 100 meters deep, all right, beneath rock. So the GBU 57 was designed. That's what's the massive ordnance penetrator that was designed for the facility, the previous one near at Fordow, right? It's 14,000 kilogram bomb, but it may not be effective, say weaponeering guys, against this new facility. The Iranians know, of course, we've had this weapon, and they know it's undoubtedly they know what it does, and we haven't been secretive about it. So it wouldn't be surprising, because they are bright people, if they have designed this purposefully to avoid being destroyed by that. So there's an Institute for Science and International Security, kind of like a geek tank, and of former weapons inspectors. And they're the ones who say that the centrifuges are probably in there, and that they can rapidly now produce enough weapons-grade uranium to make Iran capable of an unstoppable nuclear breakout, which means weaponizing it. Okay, well, no, I'm sorry, it means amassing enough to make a weapon, and then you have to weaponize it, which means obviously putting it on the nose of a missile or in a bomb in such a way that it is stable until it explodes and all that shit. All right, so scientists think that part, the breakout part, will probably take about just a month, and then the part where they weaponize it could be 6 months to a year. So we're not talking about a lot of time from press button to Iran having a nuclear weapon. Of course, there may just be one at that stage, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. It's a effing nuclear weapon.
Right.
This is concerning, right? I don't know, I don't know how interested the audience would be to have one of these weapons inspectors types coming on talking about this, but I think, this is a story that we're going to continue to follow.
Yeah.
It's kind of important.
Yeah. What's ironic is I was just glancing at the 2024 U.S. intelligence report on Iran that's put out, and under WMDs it says Iran is not currently undertaking the key nuclear weapons development activities necessary to produce a testable nuclear device. Oh, okay.
When was that,
Jason? It came out March 11th of this year.
Oh, this year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the problem is, and I'm not going to get into the whys and wherefores and pros and cons of the JICPOA, but since the JICPOA was reversed, we've had no visibility on
that's a nuclear deal for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Yeah.
So whatever you think of the deal, it did a couple of things for us. One, it enabled us to monitor. I mean, it gave us a reason, a rationale for weapons inspectors to be in there monitoring this shit. which, as Jason will tell you, gives us access in other ways to really find out what the fuck's going on. Okay, we lost that by scrapping the JICPOA. And the other thing is the kind of the carrot and the stick have become weaker and weaker. Iran no longer is so concerned about sanctions, all right, and is no longer concerned about the United States, as we arguably appear to be less and less effective on the world stage. So that in any case, the International Atomic Energy Agency estimates, right? So it's not Andy Milburn or some rag, that Iran can produce enough weapons-grade uranium for a nuclear weapon in just 12 days, all right? Not a month. I'll say that again, 12 days. I mean, if it has apparently three of these advanced centrifuge cascades, which it does, but if it has them installed now in this new facility, and half of its stock that we know it has, just half of its current stock of 60% enriched uranium, which was the limit set for them. Now, if it does, if it uses all its stock of highly enriched uranium, it could produce enough for 4 nuclear weapons, is what the IAEA estimates. So I'll say that again, right? 4 nuclear weapons, given its current, what they think it has now, currently enriched uranium. All right. So in another 2 months, it'll have enough for 6 weapons. Then it'll take about 6 months to test and deploy a bomb or missile. Just a very kind of crude delivery system. Actually, not a missile. It'll be a bomb, or some sort of projectile fired from a ship. Maybe so the point here is that it's going to be a crude delivery system. They don't have to fuck around, making thing accurate, because it's a nuclear weapon. We'll explain why later. And so General Milley testified to Congress in March that they will have a missile-delivered warhead, likely in a year or two, right? Missile-delivered, let alone the bombs earlier. That is worrying. And again, that's coming from the
joints, right?
former chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Actually, I'm sorry, he said that last year. So
Wow. Okay.
So things are worse. Yeah. So all of which means, Iran's about to become to break out and become a fully fledged a nuclear weapons state. All right. No, it doesn't necessarily mean that, but it has the ability to do so on demand. Right. It's choice.
If you're Iran, why wouldn't you do it at this point?
You don't. I think there's probably more. They've got, yes, absolutely, but they don't want the world to know, in the same way that Israel still is ambiguous about whether or not it has nuclear weapons, even though everyone knows it does. The Iranians want to play that same game.
Yeah,
but they have more reason to, because they are not going to be welcomed to the club.
Yeah,
we couldn't. No one can avoid welcoming Israel. It just happened.
Also, what happens when they do get it? Like Saudi Arabia is going to get their nuclear weapon ASAP.
That's interesting, because
the Crown Prince even said it, like in an interview, in an English-speaking interview. He's like, "We have to get it. Like, if they get it, we're going to get it."
Yeah, well, certainly. That puts the pressure on the race, and in the Saudi case, they know they're not going to get it from us, right? So they'll get it from elsewhere. What they do want from us, under the terms of the now likely defunct Abraham Accord, was for the United States to help them build a nuclear industry, to include uranium enrichment for energy purposes, right?
Right.
So you can see in MBS's mind, I'll get the Americans to help us enrich up to 60%, and then country X can help us, maybe the Russians, who knows, help us go the rest of the way. So this has all kinds of alarming repercussions for proliferation, right? But not, aside, Jason, you dug up that one, I think it was Twitter comment yesterday, something, but there isn't a lot of coverage in the news on this. I
No.
mean, you've got to dig quite a bit and
Yeah.
and talk to a lot of, not a lot, but some key nerds, right? Everyone's got a pocket full of key nerds who can tell them about uranium enrichment.
Yeah, it's not a lot being talked about with it.
I think there was
that, right?
there was something on Fox News. Somebody went on Fox News and said it, and there was like a bunch of like Twitter traffic saying, somebody from the inside of the Iranian government said, or like an MP or whoever said that, XYZ.
Yeah, I mean, but we're not even looking at Iranian claims. We're looking at what the International Atomic Energy Agency. I purposefully pitched everything I said not to sound alarmist, not according to the Israelis, according to what our own experts are finding out. So yeah, it's worrying, and I don't think there's censorship at work here, but it certainly doesn't credit anyone to bring this out in the public domain right now, does it?
Yeah.
In the same way that it doesn't for the Russians to be seen to be attacking NATO already.
Right.
All right.
That was great.
You just sound. Everyone's like, "Oh, the world's in a shit state."
Yeah,
we will end on a silent note. We've got to start ending on a really bright note.
I know.
Jokes.
Yeah, let's see.
Jokes.
Yeah, Team House Eyes On Party. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bring your own bottle. With live call-ins.
Oh
right?
God, could you imagine?
Yeah, no, seriously. I mean, I'll read the comments and I'm thinking we've got a wealth of talent out there and we need to bring some on board. No, I mean interaction. I think we have thoughts, constructive comments, recommendations, suggestions are very, very welcome. We are certainly, we are tied to our audience probably far more than any other podcast. We are just your vassals and your vassals. All right. On that note,
like and subscribe. Check out Andy's book, award-winning.
Please buy it.
Links will be in the description.
He says desperately. It's really good.
Most important thing to help support the show is patreon.com/theteamhouse. YouTube is literally, I'm not joking when I say this. I know I sound hyperbolic. It is crushing our soul. YouTube money is down about 70%. It's crazy. On the same amount of views and watch hours, it's down about 70%. So it's like nuts what's going on. So patreon.com/theteamhouse, please.
It's a great point. I mean, I'm a big believer. Well, not a big believer, but I understand the role that tipping plays in our society. But think Patreon could be as little as what?
$5 a month.
$5 a month. $5 a month. You throw that away, not throw it away. You give it to the guy who's bagging your groceries. At least I do. I know, D, yours varies by a decimal point or two, but it's nothing. You don't even notice it. And yet you get insights behind the scenes.
Completely ad-free.
That'll prevent you. Yeah, that'll kill your appetite for a long time.
Yeah, ad-free audio and video. We do bonus episodes too. Every once in a while, we'll jump on and just shoot the shit. And you have better access to us. Like you can message us more directly, and we will look at it because you are a supporter. So.
We will look at it, even the 10% of just file abuse that we receive.
So, when people become supporters, it's a little bit less vile abuse. There's a little bit
actually, there. 10% of our audience just tune in to vilely abuse us because it's the same people every week.
Yeah.
I'm like, many of them. I'm like, okay, but you like watching the show because you keep coming back.
Yeah.
You hate us.
Yeah.
Which is fine by me. We're not likable.